It seems like selling is the great part of it, and that's the party. But whenever you throw a good party, there's a lot of preparation in advance, right? You got to get the DJ, you got to get the margarita machine, you've got all these things that you have to do. You got to get the invites out. There's a lot of work involved in throwing a good party. And that's the same thing with co-sell, because the selling is the party, but you have to do the work ahead of time.
Welcome to Unlock Cloud Go-to-Market, the series where hosts Erin and Patrick Riley share the essential stages of the cloud GTM maturity model to start, optimize, and grow your company's revenue through the cloud. They've helped countless ISVs tackle the ins and outs of their cloud GTM motion. And in each episode, they're sharing those success stories from the people who have put them into place. Because ultimately, this way of thinking is the future, and the future is now.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Unlock Cloud Go-to-Market. I'm co-host Patrick Riley.
And I'm co-host Erin Feiger.
And today we are joined by none other than Brennan Lynch, Global Director of CyberArk. How you doing, Brennan?
I am well. Thank you so much for having me. It's quite a pleasure.
All right. So as you know, our Unlock Cloud Go-to-Market theme is around our maturity model and the 4 different phases and stages that partners are always working in, fluidly moving in and out of, and going from one phase to the next phase in your journey. So we're going to talk to Brennan about his experience from his point of view inside of CyberArk on when you first started at CyberArk, where were they in their maturity journey? And what are some of the things you've done along the way? And where are you now? And what are some of the things you're working on to continue to advance your experience? So without further ado, let's dig into that conversation.
Brennan, let's start with why cloud relationships matter, right? We talk a lot with a lot of other people about the big buzzwords of what we should do tactically and what we should do operationally, but why are we here? What's the value of cloud relationships in your perspective?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing about cloud relationships is where, the world is moving, right? Everybody's moving their environments to the cloud, right? And the cloud is a place, I like to say, it's just not your place. It's somewhere else, right? And it all starts out as kind of a finance story. This whole narrative of what we do really starts out as, can we change it from a capital expense to an operating expense? And is that valuable to us, and why? So your customers are doing that, and your software publishers are doing that same thing, right? And it allows for that elastic compute capacity. So as you grow, you can just dial up more cloud instead of having to buy more infrastructure. So it allows you to, companies to grow that much faster. But same thing for our customers, right? They're doing the same thing. And then if you look at marketplaces, cloud marketplaces are growing faster in consumption than the cloud itself. If you look at some of the research like Bessemer Research or some of the other trade industries that have some pretty good published articles about that.
And that's what brought me into this whole conversation. 4 years ago, I got tapped on the shoulder. We had a customer asking us to go procure through cloud marketplace. Cloud was always kind of a thing, but the marketplace decisions, the customers asking, that really kickstarted it for me. And I know a lot of companies are now coming into this with that cloud first mindset. So having a relationship with both the controller of your customer in a way, as well as the vehicle in which you're going to transact with that customer obviously makes pretty good sense.
Absolutely. And it's just such a low cost way to go to market too,
From your point of view, there's the industry shift and then your role within CyberArk. How are you specifically looking at that evolution, and what has been your journey from the role you take inside of CyberArk?
I think the idea is, to have a vision, right? To look at all your assets and have a vision and have a timeline, and then realize some things in your vision are going to action immediately and some things are going to action, farther out in the future. But it's that idea of playing the long game, right? Here at CyberArk, we are a SaaS solution provider, right? And so the idea was, let's start taking advantage of our SaaS, our cloud service provider that's hosting all of our products to transact with our customers through them, and creating the infrastructure and the business that's required to do that, right? As I'm sure you guys well know, you don't just turn on cloud marketplaces, there's a process to it, and there's a process to setting up your infrastructure to do it and to do it right. Identifying your finance motions, your order reconciliation motions, your marketing motions, your legal motions, right? These are all part of that process. And when I came into CyberArk, there was a fair amount of that to be established, but getting the operations down and is, I think, paramount to making a successful run at leveraging cloud service provider marketplaces.
I know we've talked to you at length on kind of this story, the financial story behind these cloud relationships. Can you tell everybody your point of view on why is this really a financial story from a relationship perspective and not a programmatic story?
Well, I think about it as numbers, right? You look at the economies of scale. Just take AWS as an example, right? AWS has 18,000 selling resources and 300,000 commercial customers. The likelihood that they're in someone in your account is highly probable, right? So if you are a software publisher and you think about, your entire sales organization, maybe you have 1,000 people, maybe you have 3,000 people, but being able to leverage 18,000 other sellers, that's just in AWS alone. If you go to Azure, there's probably a similar amount. GCP, probably not quite as much, but still something. That's a great way to expand your business, right? Without really any cost. You pay your listing fees to transact it, but this can be fairly nominal, right? I look at it as it's a way to leverage what I find to be our lowest cost indirect route to market and be inclusive of our entire channel community, GSIs, resellers, all that can participate with us on this, but then also leveraging this massive economy of scale. I was doing some research for another article I'm writing, and if you look, there's over 93,000 services listings in any one of the 3 cloud service providers, which is mind-blowing that there's that many, right? And if you think about, say, like Accenture alone, they had 17 marketplace listings last summer, and now they have over 60. So you start to see where some of these are starting to pivot, right? And that's where you get in that conversation about cloud service provider spend and the drive to do digital transformation efforts, especially by the GSIs for the last decade, right? We're going to help you move from on-prem to cloud. We're going to charge you some services to do that. And now they're sitting there looking at the total addressable dollars they have at a client. They goes, we've moved everything we used to have for our services over to the cloud, and now that's the bigger budget. Well, we need to start pivoting our transaction mechanism over to this entity we've created, this cloud service providers marketplace, so we can start recapturing some of those dollars that we're losing in this total addressable funds available, right? Those are some of the examples of where you start to see this as a finance story. Where is the money at? It's very simple. Where's the money? Go there.
I think that's an aha moment for some folks listening to this episode, in that companies are making committed spend agreements with the clouds, and now that's where the budget is, but also thinking about it from the services lens of that's where the budget is to buy the infrastructure. It's also where I need to make sure I can tap in my services cost or my services into that budget as well, and continue to shift and move more things over there so that you can tap into where that budget is now.
You want to look at where you can involve your service providers, right? So you don't completely blow up your support channel. Where should they be pivoting and where should you be working with them? There's, and some partners are starting to lean in on this. They're starting to realize doing a joint offering on our marketplace listings is a good idea. And you start thinking about what this looks like at the customer. So Patrick, back to your original narrative, this is a finance story. What does this look like at the customer from their finance story, right? I think the idea is strategic sourcing managers are getting to an end of a procurement cycle, and they have a collection of things they need to buy. And at that point, they've already basically negotiated the best price. So they have the best price. And now what they're looking at is, where can I get the best value? Where do I transact this best price purchase? Do I transact it through a marketplace? Do I transact it through a reseller? Do I transact it direct? Do I do some blend of both? Do I do it through a reseller via the marketplace? If I do it through the marketplace, will I get credit towards my consumption spend? If I do it through the reseller, will I get volume credit back end? Can I do both? And when you start looking at some of these customers who have a $1 billion plus annual spend, this is a material line item amount in their financial statements. I truly believe that at some point they're going to start looking at having a strategic leader who's managing this spend and proliferating it across all elements of the organization, not just IT. Marketing is buying software, human resources buying software or services. Can that be bought through a cloud service provider marketplace? Can that help draw down on our spend, right? If you have a new PPA, I think the other thing with like AWS right now, it's 25% of their total PPA if you're on a PPA. So it's a fair amount of money if you're looking down $1 billion annual commitment.
How did committed spend and procurement impact your cloud strategy at CyberArk?
I mean, it definitely started to push us in that direction. We've seen some incredible deals come through. We had a deal one time I could tell you about very ambiguously where it grew the deal 10x. It was pivoted towards a cloud service provider and went from 5 figures to 6 figures just because of being able to leverage that committed spend. So I think that's definitely material value. But I would have to say, a large portion of our deals too don't contribute to the committed spend. They're leveraging the economies of scale in the procurement method, right? Not having to use a purchase order, not having to have necessarily a CyberArk EULA executed because we can use the AWS standard agreement for marketplace. So there's different vehicles that people can tap into to be able to leverage the value of it, even if there's not that committed spend.
I think a couple of things, like when I was a small business owner driving services, you couldn't transact services through the marketplace. It always slowed down getting the services started. How easy is it to work with your legal? How easy is it to onboard? And if I could have just sold through the marketplace those services contracts, like it would have saved me so much time and money in like getting those deals done.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sometimes, you can transact through a marketplace and you don't have to be set up as an authorized vendor at the client. And then, there's so many companies right now who are trying to pare down the amount of vendors they manage.
Yeah. And that's also something as like a smaller business that we have to be concerned about is, they only can have so many vendors. So when they go to pare down, it's like, will I get cut? Will my business owner who's managing my contract be able to like lobby and protect me as a vendor on their vendor card? Or will I get pushed out because they can only have so many vendors and then they're forced to like find a different person who might be available through these other mechanisms? I totally felt that pain too.
I mean, it's funny is I know a large multinational insurance company that makes all their software purchases go through marketplaces so they can manage all of their software purchases. It's a way for them to get a better handle on what software is coming into the company and what their exposure is financially to this software. If they can push it all through a marketplace.
There's other behaviors other than just committed spend and like asking your customer, hey, Mr. Customer, like, do you have a committed spend? Even if you don't have a committed spend, still understanding, like, do you have different procurement initiatives going on inside your organization around streamlining that you would benefit or you would align to these new initiatives inside your company by buying our solution through the marketplace, that it's not just a committed spend conversation. Something else you said was the deal sizes grow. And so I've talked to a lot of ISVs that'll say, well, that was my customer. I was going to get that revenue anyways. And even hearing your story further validates the stories of like, yes, that's your customer. You were going to get that revenue, but you got more revenue potentially, and you were able to potentially pull in that revenue sooner rather than later. So a 1-year deal might become a 3-year deal that they want to buy all up front because they have this committed spend. So sometimes people worry about cannibalizing their own customer base. It's like, I'm going to get that revenue anyways. Now you're telling me to shift it over here and pay 3%, but that there's actually other financial benefits that you could see by doing that.
Sales always likes to say they were going to get that money, but I don't think they were going to get as much, right? If you know someone has to spend money, do you give them your deepest, lowest discount? I don't think so. You give them a fair deal, but you know they're going to have to spend money. So you're not worried about losing it as much. And if they know they're going to spend and whatever they spend, they're going to get a credit on, or they're going to use it to drive their overall consumption amount because they know they're going to renegotiate their PPA soon. They want to show stronger numbers so they can show a bigger discount. That's another option as well.
You never know what's behind there. And so, yes, that's your customer. And yes, you were going to get that revenue, but hopefully more times than none, that revenue becomes larger, or you sign multi-year contracts. You get the customer committed for a longer period of time up front. Like, there's lots of good benefits.
And so hopefully everybody listening knows by now why cloud relationships matter. And Brennan's talked us through the financial story. And we've talked in depth on why this is something you should care about and why it matters to CyberArk. But I think let's be a little bold now. Let's talk about monetizing your AWS relationship. Let's break it up into like co-build, co-market, and co-sell, right? So I'll start with co-build, monetizing your relationship with AWS. How does CyberArk use integrations, whether that your product integrations, to drive value and spend? Like, what's that look like for you?
I can chat a little bit about this. I don't run the co-build side here at CyberArk, but I have done it in previous roles, and I have an idea about how co-build should be done, whether it's specifically how we do it or not. The co-build process should be developed with monetization in mind. You know, the cloud service providers are famous for coming to ISVs and saying, hey, we'd like you to be a launch partner of this new service, build this integration so you can be a launch partner. And everybody does it because they think it's going to create some sort of brand value for them. But what it's doing is it's creating some sort of marginal credibility for the cloud service provider that this new service they're offering is of value and merit to the customer, because look at all these third-party solutions that have integrated to it. And that's all well and good for everybody from a feel-good feeling, but then you have to start looking at, well, what is the cost of that integration? And what's your projected revenue? What's your ROI? And what's your opportunity cost for creating something else that may have more material value to you, right? And I think that's where many ISVs fall down, is they don't think about the value of the integration. They just create integrations for integration's sake. And if you go back in history a little bit, most cloud service provider relationships started with the integration side. When cloud service providers were trying to establish themselves, they thought it was a good idea to create these integrations with third-party solution providers to drive adoption and consumption, right? And that all seemed like a good idea until, they created the marketplaces. Some, engineers hacked that together on a weekend and started actually identifying revenue through sales. And then they realized, oh, these integrations are cool, but there's no way to identify the actual revenue that matriculates from them. So the cloud service providers pivoted the tip of the spear of their relationship with ISVs. And the tip of the spear of the relationship is monetization. And all other processes are accretive to that. And the ideal monetization zenith is a transaction through their marketplace. If you think about your integrations should be accretive to your monetization process. Will this help me sell more stuff? Will this drive consumption and utilization of the cloud service provider's tools and tech? So you can go to the cloud service provider sales resources when you're in a deal and say, hey, I'm selling XYZ product and it drives a 10x, a 1x, a 10% consumption of EKS or whatever your tool may be, right? That's a neat story. Then you can get a cloud service provider seller to work with you, right? And oftentimes they may be in at a different level. They may be in at the cloud team, and, CyberArk, we may be in on the security team. And so we're developing our business here. They're developing their business there. And we want them to know about us over here so that we can develop more deals, right? we've had that happen quite often where we start talking to a resource over the cloud service provider and it ends up expanding our deal because it gets us into different divisions or regions that we didn't know about or we didn't have access to, right? So that's where that deal size, can grow through actually growing more license count. If you think about the cloud service provider seller and the budgets they manage, if I'm a team that manages $1 billion budget at a cloud service provider, you have a lot more access than, say, a software publisher who's coming in trying to sell even a $5 million deal. $5 million and $1 billion deal, access internally, big difference. Just looking at the signatory authority required to engage those two deals, right? That's where I look at, engaging these sellers is important. But to get back on topic, to have integrations that are material to these discussions. Is there something unique? Does it create extensibility in your own platform? Does it create extensibility in the cloud service provider's platform? Does it give them capabilities that are not native to them? Do you have something that is multi-cloud capable? Because the cloud service providers are stuck in their cloud. They rely on their third-party ISVs to do it. So if you have a story that enables multi-cloud support for the customer, that's great, right? If it enables some utilization of the cloud service provider's tools, it creates a better result for the customer. Great, right? If it's an integration that your GSIs or your consultants or your resellers can use inside of their own framework for their bespoke offerings that are foundationed in your solution, great. Look at your install base and look at how many clients from your install base could use this. And then look at the install base of the product that you're integrating with. And yes, the cloud service providers won't tell you that, but Google's a pretty amazing place to go find interesting things. And you can make it a projection. You can say, my adoption rate of this is 20%. And this is my total addressable market for these two. And you can fudge some numbers and really get an idea of where you should be going with your integrations.
So for those listening, when you think about monetizing the relationship from a co-build perspective, you got to look at those integrations and kind of ask yourself 4 key things. Does this align to our roadmap with our strategy, our customer, and our partners? Does this help us sell more? Will this help increase my partnership? And will this build a better together story that's strong with the consumption practical examples you gave?
Now we got to go take that to my marketing team and we got to go help build that co-marketing story and strategy on like, how are we going to then message this to help the customer, to help our channel, and also to sell to our cloud provider that we are collaborating with. So what marketing strategies does CyberArk use, and how are you leveraging and monetizing that cloud relationship when it comes to co-market?
Something I should have said too on the first one is, have dedicated resources, right? Who just do that with your cloud service provider. So we have a dedicated resource who just does marketing for cloud service providers, right? They work with the regional marketing managers, the product marketing and the corporate marketing to, get an idea of what is our direction, what is our theme, but then also leverage those regional resources to help expand your capability, right? Create extensibility within yourself, not just with their products, right? In looking at strategic investment letters from the cloud service providers is important, right? You have to sign up for a commitment of, additional growth revenue. But I think my guidance on that is look at what's possible from a growth revenue and then back into how much you want to get an investment from the cloud service provider. Don't look at the cloud service provider wants you to look at it and say, oh, how much money do you want? How we can give you all this money, right? What you don't realize is then you're leveraged into that much of an uplift, a 10x uplift or such in your revenues. It's almost like going into a car dealership and they say, well, what do you want your payment to be? And then you come out and you've got a 10-year note on the car because you wanted your payment to be $100 or something like that. It's similar to that. So you have to be prescriptive in looking at the cloud service providers and their investment letters and thinking about, all right, what really can I afford? And then take that money that comes from what you can afford. So from a marketing perspective, then you look at it wisely, like, what campaigns are going to be smart? What campaigns are going to leverage your integrations well? What campaigns are going to leverage your other indirect routes to market well, right? Can you do something jointly with the GSIs or with one of the big VARs or a smaller VAR or a consulting partner, right? Are you, leveraging it for your own user conferences? And how are you leveraging this investment or this spend, right? From a marketing perspective, are you identifying a target audience? Are you bringing a new integration to market with it? The idea is to use it to drive revenue.
The journey you're going on, right? It's don't just build to build, like co-build the right things. You said was know your TAM and what the potential revenue could be by integrating that into your product and doing that co-build. Once you know that revenue number that you're trying to go after, then right sizing your marketing budget and your co-marketing investment to that revenue that you're trying to go after. And then once you have the budget for the marketing, then setting the campaign and the go-to-market strategy and activities that you're going to do, that's going to hopefully get you to those customers and to that revenue that you were projecting from the co-build initiative on why you even decided to do that co-build.
Absolutely. It's that idea of monetization leads, right? Don't co-build just to co-build. Don't co-market just to co-market. Do those activities with monetization in mind. How is this going to be accretive to the entire monetization process? How is this going to make more money for me, the ISV?
Aside from AI, the other big buzzword we throw around a lot is co-sell, but that's kind of the third C in here. How have you all structured co-sell efforts at CyberArk to be successful? Like, what are some practical ways people listening can approach that?
It seems like selling is the great part of it, and that's the party. But whenever you throw a good party, there's a lot of preparation in advance, right? You got to get the DJ, you got to get the margarita machine, you've got all these things that you have to do. You got to get the invites out. There's a lot of work involved in throwing a good party. And that's the same thing with co-sell, because the selling is the party, but you have to do the work ahead of time, right? You have to make sure that you can transact those deals efficiently and at scale. That is part of your Salesforce process. If you're using Salesforce or whatever CRM process is, you have to make sure that it's part of your finance and order reconciliation process. And you have to also make sure that you have a good alignment with your accounts receivable, because they're the ones who are getting the money. And they're going to be very upset if they don't get the money from your cloud service provider, right? And of course, legal, right? You have to make sure that you can transact in the different municipalities around the world, right? There's some that are challenging, like Canada of all places, which I think is like the Justin Bieber of countries. Like, it wants to be tough and hard, but it's really not. Like, Canada has some of the most stringent tax laws ever for, I don't know why. It's understanding, all right, how are we going to do business in Canada? And getting that mapped out, and then starting to look at how does your organization map to your cloud service providers that you're using, and how are you going to expose them to one another, right? Are you going to do propensity to buy lists? Are you going to do ACE registrations? Are you going to look and see where we have joint account alignment and go to market there? And that comes back to structuring your team. Ideally, you have a resource who's an inside resource is doing all of your deal registrations, like ACE if you're in the AWS, and all your private offers, right? And is doing the back end operations and tying those two things together, right? Because an ACE registration hopefully leads to a private offer, and then a private offer leads to a launched ACE registration, right? So it's a loop. And then you want a field resource, who's going out and working with the channel managers and the account managers and helping to proliferate this idea, this concept of transacting through a marketplace and connecting them, right? Because what we do is still fairly new. I've been in cybersecurity sales for 25 years now, but this whole marketplace thing is really 5-7 years old. It's not real new. And we are still agents of change, right? And the idea is we're designed to break things, to create problems that drive revenue. So then we can go create new solutions. And so we're bringing this concept to our sellers, right? You're changing their model. They're breaking their model. And that has to do with their income. They're on commissions. This has to do with how they're paying for, their college education for their kids. And so you have to make them feel very comfortable about this, but understand the longer term gain. And we take a personal approach here where we are on our calls with the cloud service provider seller and the CyberArk seller initially to connect them together. And we have a very structured approach. We have sort of a talk track, a checklist of the things that we want to make sure we hit on in every one of those initial conversations on a specific account so that we understand, all right, did we do the right things? Because the biggest problem that sales is having in the world is at the end of a sales cycle, the client pivots to a cloud service provider and they didn't account for it in the economics of their deal. And now the client wants to transact that way, and you kind of go with the way the client transacts, and you have a listing fee that you didn't consider in the economics of your deal. And everybody gets real emotional about that. And it's unfortunate because they can know early and often in the sales cycle if this client is going to have any sort of likelihood to want to engage with a cloud service provider. And there's a variety of tools out there. Tackle even has one that's pretty rad. So that's the idea with sales is engage early and often so you don't get caught at the end of a sales cycle and everybody gets real upset. You know ahead of time, is this client likely going to want to leverage a cloud service provider or not?
You've implemented some great practices, though. Can you share a little more on some of the things you've implemented at CyberArk? So you have a dedicated team, you have a script and a checklist, but also if you find out that the customer wants to go through the marketplace near the end of the sales cycle, it changes the economics of the deal. So how are you guys getting in front of that to try and make sure that you're having those conversations sooner rather than later so that the economics of the deal are getting structured correctly from the get-go?
We try and create a market leading program here at CyberArk. Our idea is not to be, leaders in this space, but luminaries, right? People that have that vision. And that's my goal for that program, is to have a vision that's ahead. And the idea to do that is you really have to have buy-in from leadership, right? You have to have buy-in from your sales leadership, from your channel leadership, from your operations leadership, that this is a good idea. And you have to do a better selling to them. They have to understand the value, right? Why is this material to them? And why should they lean in on this? And from that, then it needs to be part of the actual selling operations, the selling process. It should be when a sales director is doing his reviews with his team and he's got 10 accounts he's reviewing with them, he should say, have you spoken to the cloud service provider on this? Are the material on that account? Do they have a PPA? Do they not? Are they leveraging any one of the three? It should be part of the opportunity evaluation from a sales leader to his sales resources, right? And they should do this early and often, holistically across all their accounts.
Does CyberArk use like MedPick or Bant or something like that? Like incorporating these types of cloud questions into your sales methodology and process? Like, what sales methodology does CyberArk use?
So the idea is, this needs to become part of your process from the top down. They need to understand the reasons why. This creates extensibility within your sales force. This creates visibility into other pockets of money at the client, pockets of funding, and also creates access to an additional selling resource, right? There's programs at these different cloud service providers where they can create essentially evangelist on your behalf. What if you had a product evangelist at your cloud service provider who was looking for deals for you and then was evangelizing your technology on your behalf every time they saw something that the customer was looking at? And this is, a entity within your client that is doing a tremendous more volume than you are, right? They have a tremendous more touch points than you are because they're enormity of their products, right? I think AWS has something like 1,000 products or something crazy like that. So if you think about how many products your ISV has and how many AWS has, their touch points are going to be that much greater. This is a finance story. This is a story of numbers, right? A story of economies of scale.
Earlier in our conversation, you talked about the lowest cost for indirect route to market, and it's inclusive of channel. So, share with us a little bit of your perspective and CyberArk's perspective on the channel, MSSPs, GSIs. How are you thinking about them in your overall strategy?
The idea is, they all have their value and their merit, and then look at it through that lens of, your monetization strategy with your cloud service provider. If I'm looking at an MSP, right, there's tremendous amount of customers who are pivoting that way. They want to have this as a service. They want to have the resources running these applications as a service, but they also have a cloud service provider spend. So they want to maybe transact this MSP purchase through the marketplace. It's also where you can look at your integrations. Is there integrations that the MSP may be valuable to, right? If the MSP is creating a blended offering for the client, they're essentially creating a results-based offering. But hey, the client wants to have this end result. So we're going to create a collection of products that work to create this end result for the client. And if you integrate with these other brands, it would really create a more cohesive solution. And then they can essentially transact the MSP offering through the marketplace. And the MSPs are looking at it as well. They're leaning in and wanting to leverage the available funds, but also the ease of transacting through that. The smart idea is to look at your strategic MSPs and think about, hey, do my integrations make sense? Where would you like to see better, different, more enabling integrations that you think would help sell more of your offering and more of my product? The idea with GSIs is they've had digital transformation practices for probably nearly a decade now. They've been deriving consulting services dollars, billable hours for that for some time, moving clients from on-prem to the cloud, right? And in my opinion is that in doing so, they've created these massive cloud infrastructure spend budgets. And as we know at a client, there is a finite amount of total addressable dollars. And I think what they've started to see is, wow, we've generated these cloud infrastructure budgets and it's now encroaching on the total addressable dollars available to us from the client, because maybe we don't line up with that cloud infrastructure spend budget, right? But what they're starting to see is, oh, well, if we pivot and start to be able to transact through the marketplace, we can recapture those funds that we've essentially lost to that total addressable market through the cloud infrastructure spend. And we can transact our services and our offerings that much easier. So I definitely see the GSI starting to pivot that way. And one example is if you look at Accenture, they had 17 marketplace listings last year, and now they have over 60. And they follow a sort of a flow around 5 different themes of what they put into marketplace, right? It's always a service that they offer in and around deployment and configuration of ISV solutions, MSP offering, or straight resell, right? So there's different flavors, and to look at, your roadmap with them, think about what do I do first, and then what do I do progressively with them, right? And I think that's very important to start looking at.
Super insightful conversation. Thanks for taking the time. But I've got one more for you. For me, you're in Canada. You're throwing a Justin Bieber co-party. You got Accenture there. You got a cloud provider. The new guy or gal rolls up in their $100 car, and now they're asking you for advice. Hey, I need to get my cloud go-to-market going. What do I do?
The quick advice is, you need to be intentional in your approach. You can't go at this half-heartedly. You have to lean in, and you have to lean in with intention, right? You have to have dedicated resources doing the dedicated work, and then you'll be successful. If you try and do it partially, it just won't work. If you screw in a light bulb partially, it's just going to flicker, right? You got to screw it all the way in to get it to work. And that's what you have to do with these cloud service providers. You have to lean in and really have an intentional plan and focus on what you're going to do and understand all the nuances of working with them, right? It's like Fight Club, right? You don't talk about Fight Club outside of Fight Club. There's all kinds of nuances with every single one of them to unlock, and then you get more access. And as you lean in, they lean in. It is that experience.
It's a keep giving, right? Kind of a concept, and it starts to happen reciprocally. I 1,000% agree with you. Like dedicated resources, doing dedicated work, like make sure you screw that light bulb all the way in if you're going to want it to work. We often get that question of like, how long does this take? What should we expect? And I know there's different accelerators that can help you like speed up that timeline, but in general, like what kind of a timeline have you seen at CyberArk?
How much do you want to just do amazing things, right? So at CyberArk, we grew our business 10x in 30 months. And we went from immaterial to AWS to one of 50 out of their 10,000 partners that is very material. So it just depends on how much intention you want to do, how much glass you want to break along the way, and give people hugs. Break glass, but be kind about it. Do it with a smile. And you have to be prepared for that. And you have to know how to do it, right? You have to have understanding of the processes.
It's a multi-year journey to actually see the fruits of your labor really turn into meaningful ROI for you.
It's like building a new channel, right? If you're a new software company and you build a new channel, it's 18 months at minimum, right? Now we started making, good revenue within the first year. And I remember that first call from finance team on January 2nd. And they basically said, what did you do last month? And I was like, I made us some money. It's part of that process, but also have a goal in mind. Like how much of your indirect route to market do you want to flow through cloud service providers at any given point? Where's your goal?
Two things you said that I really love is like, one, what is your current expectation that you give on establishing new routes to market? And that should be the same kind of expectation, or at least a starting point. And then another thing that could factor into that timeline is the amount of revenue. Like what percentage of your revenue do you want to see flow through there? And then how long do you think that will take to do, right? So it's a little bit of a balance. It's not an exact science equation. There's a little bit of balance there.
Yeah, and you definitely want to look at the contributing factors, right? So if you have this thing or that thing, it'll be more accretive to that monetization process, right? So like, all right, I can get to you here until we have comp neutrality with our sellers. And then we're going to sort of flatten out. When you have comp neutrality, we can get more, or we have comp positive, we can get even more, right? You have to make sure that you identify like, these are our stopgaps. If you say, hey, we're going to get to here and you don't, and you haven't identified all the key contributing factors that you need to get there, you're going to get caught looking like you didn't perform because of things that are out of your control. So it's important to identify like, what are inhibitors from success and identify those early on.
This has been great, Brendan. Thanks for taking so much time with us. Before we go, though, if anybody listening wants to learn more from you, they want to connect with you, come to your next co-party, like what's the best way for them to do that?
Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's pretty easy. It's Brennan Lynch. I have an article on there that talks a little bit about this if you go into my articles section. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always here to chat.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories. I love your perspective and the angle you're coming at it from the monetization aspect. So, such a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me. Appreciate it. You have a wonderful day.
Erin, great conversation with Brendan, right? What were your thoughts on the co-sell piece?
I love that he's like, co-sell is a co-party. And when you think about it like a co-party, there's lots of planning that you do that goes into throwing a really great party and all the prep work. That correlation of like, how do you really operationalize everything so that when you are ready to co-sell and have this co-party, you've got everything in place to throw a really great party or to have a really great co-sell engagement with your cloud provider and for it to go smoothly. I just really loved that analogy.
But obviously through the help of Tackle and through the co-build, co-market, co-sell model, they saw 10x growth in 30 months. And he talked about being intentional and what were some of the other takeaways you had?
A couple other sound bites that I really loved that he said and it resonated with me was they're not trying to be leaders, they're trying to be luminaries. And I really loved that analogy on like illuminating the possibilities and this new route to market and helping shine a light on that and the potential and the things that need to be done in order to accomplish that new route to market.
I love when he said, we like to go and think about this strategy where we break glass, but we're kind about it.
That really aligns with what we've heard from other ISVs. We've built into our maturity model, which is you need dedicated resources doing dedicated work, and that it is going to take, he said 30 months. That's 2.5 years. It is going to take a couple of years to implement this route to market. And in fact, when he said, what are the expectations you put on your other routes to market when you were establishing them? And thinking about that from that perspective too is like a great question we should start to ask other ISVs when they ask us that. Do you give it a year? Do you give it 2 years? Like, what's the expectation? And then can you, at least from a starting point, get a baseline? Use that as your baseline of like, is that what it will take for us to get that type of ROI from our cloud partner as a new route to market? And then what are the accelerators that we think will help speed that up? Or what he said as well as not just the accelerators, but the things that can stop you. And do you know all of the things that could prevent you from being successful, or what you need to unlock in order to keep moving forward and getting to that ROI in the time frame that you expected, or potentially even faster if you really know those drivers that are going to accelerate and unlock your ability to go to market with the clouds.
It's a huge business transformation. And I know the cloud providers don't like it when we call them a channel, but it is. You need to think about it in that mentality of this is a new channel you're building.
Like his words directly, a new indirect route to market.
And even still, they'll go through partners and what have you, but that you have to have that mentality, the dedicated resources and so forth.
And with a route to market, you have a plan, you have intention, you dedicate resources, you dedicate a budget, and then you execute against that. Like you need to treat it like you treat every other route to market.
This was another great episode. Thank you, Brennan Lynch. Thank you, CyberArk, for being a fantastic partner of Tackles, for taking time to come on and invest in here. Hopefully, all of you learned something as well. But this was another episode, another good episode of Unlock Cloud Go-to-Market. I'm your co-host, Patrick Riley.
I'm your co-host, Erin Feiger, in season 1 of Unlock Cloud Go-to-Market.
See you next time.
So pull up a chair, grab a notebook, and join us as we share the essential stages of the maturity model to start, optimize, and grow your company's revenue using the cloud. For more resources on executing your cloud go-to-market strategy, you can visit our website at tackle.io.